The divorce papers hit my face with enough force that one corner scratched the skin just below my left eye. I felt the sting immediately, sharp and specific, the kind of small pain that clarifies everything. The papers scattered across the kitchen floor of the apartment we had lived in for 5 years. The modest two-bedroom in Clerkenwell, with the cracked tile backsplash and the refrigerator that hummed too loudly, and the window that looked out onto a brick wall exactly 3 feet away. Damien was standing in front of me wearing a suit I had never seen before. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, probably Brioni or Tom Ford, the kind of suit that costs what we used to spend on groceries for 2 months. His new watch caught the overhead light, a Patek Philippe, rose gold, with a face so clean and expensive it looked like it could tell time in dimensions I could not perceive. Behind him, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression arranged into something between amusement and contempt, was Vanessa Cole. She was wearing a white silk blouse and black trousers that I recognized as Celine, and her hair was pulled back in the kind of effortless chignon that requires a professional and 200 pounds minimum. Damien looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not even cruelty exactly, dismissal. The look you give something that has outlived its usefulness. "Sign them," he said. His voice was flat. No preamble, no explanation beyond the obvious. I bent down and picked up the papers. 23 pages, printed on heavy cream stock, with the letterhead of a law firm I recognized as one of the most expensive in London. I did not read them closely. I did not need to. I knew what they said. I had known this moment was coming for 6 months, since the night Damien came home and told me he had closed his Series B funding round and that the company was now valued at £400 million. What would you do if the man you had spent 5 years supporting, cooking his meals, managing his life, sitting quietly in the corner of his cramped home office while he coded until 3 in the morning, believing in him when no one else did? What would you do if that man brought another woman into your home and threw legal documents in your face and told you that you were entitled to nothing? What would you do if you knew with absolute certainty that in approximately 7 minutes, the man standing in front of you in his new suit and his new watch was going to discover that everything he thought he owned was not actually his? I picked up the pen that had fallen beside the papers. I clicked it once. The sound was small and definitive in the quiet kitchen. I signed my name on the final page, Evelyn March, the name I had used for 5 years, the name that was not my real name. I set the pen down. Damien picked up the papers. He did not look at me. He looked at Vanessa, and he smiled. And the smile was the worst part of it, not because it was cruel, but because it was genuine. He was happy. He had gotten what he wanted. "You are free to leave," he said, still not looking at me. "I will have your things sent wherever you are staying. You have 72 hours to provide an address." I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress, a simple cotton dress, gray, the kind I had worn for years because it was practical and inexpensive, and because I had been pretending to be someone who needed to think about the cost of clothing. I looked at Damien. I looked at Vanessa. And I said very quietly, "You should read the contract you just made me sign." Damien looked at me for the first time since I had picked up the pen. "I know what is in the contract, Evelyn. You get nothing. No alimony, no share of the business, nothing. You signed a post-nuptial agreement 3 years ago, waiving all financial claims. This is just a formality." "Read it anyway," I said. He looked irritated now, the way people look when something they thought was finished turns out to require additional effort. He flipped to the 3rd page of the contract. He read for approximately 10 seconds. His face changed. It changed slowly, the way ice cracks, a small fracture, and then a larger one, and then the entire structure beginning to fail. "What is this?" he said. His voice was different now, uncertain. "That," I said, "is the clause stipulating that in the event of divorce, all shares held by external investors revert to the original beneficial owner as named in the amended shareholder agreement filed 6 weeks ago with Companies House." He stared at the page. "What original beneficial owner?" "Me," I said. Vanessa stepped forward. Her expression had shifted from amusement to something sharper. That is not possible. Damien's company is funded by a consortium of anonymous investors, Peninsula Capital. They own 68%. Peninsula Capital, I said, is a subsidiary holding company registered in Liechtenstein. The beneficial owner of Peninsula Capital is the House of Graymont, which is the sovereign trust entity of the Grand Duchy of Graymont. And I am Princess Evelyn Marguerite of House Graymont, second in line to the ducal throne, acting as the trust's primary instrument in all foreign asset acquisitions. The kitchen was silent. Damien was still staring at the contract. His hands were shaking slightly. I could see the tremor in the paper. And then, from the street below, came the sound of vehicles, multiple vehicles, heavy, synchronized, the particular low rumble of engines that are not built for speed, but for weight and protection. I walked to the window. I looked down at the street. 12 black SUVs had arranged themselves in a perimeter around the building. They were Range Rover Sentinels, armored with dark tinted glass and the Graymont ducal crest embossed in silver on each door. As I watched, the doors of the lead vehicle opened and 4 men in dark suits stepped out. I recognized the first man immediately. His name was Anton Reville, head of the Graymont Protective Service, and he had known me since I was 8 years old. Behind the SUVs, a longer vehicle pulled up, a Mercedes Maybach S-Class, extended body, diplomatic plates. The rear door opened. A man stepped out, tall and fair-haired, wearing a navy suit and a striped tie, and an expression of calm, absolute authority. My brother, His Serene Highness, Prince Lucian of Graymont, heir apparent to the Grand Duchy, and the person I had called 6 hours earlier to tell him I was ready to come home. I turned away from the window. I looked at Damien. You are about to have visitors. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Vanessa as if she might have an explanation for what was happening. She had gone pale beneath her professionally applied makeup. The apartment door opened, not with a knock, just opened, because Anton Reville had a key, which he had acquired from the building manager approximately 40 minutes earlier, using a very polite letter on Graymont official stationery and the implicit threat of a diplomatic incident. Anton walked in first, followed by 3 additional officers of the Protective Service. Behind them, filling the narrow hallway of our small apartment in a way that made the space seem suddenly absurd, came my brother. Lucian looked around the apartment with the expression of someone conducting an inspection. He took in the cracked tile, the humming refrigerator, the table where I had eaten breakfast alone for 5 years, while Damien worked 18-hour days building a company with money that had come through a series of shell corporations and legal structures so complex that even forensic accountants would need weeks to trace them from me. Lucian looked at Damien. Mr. Hale, I am Prince Lucian of Graymont. You have just signed a contract returning full ownership of your company to my sister. I am here to ensure the transition proceeds without complications. Damien was staring at Lucian the way people stare at things they cannot process. This is insane. Evelyn is not a princess. She works at a bookshop. She has no money. We live in a 2-bedroom flat in Clerkenwell. She lived here, Lucian corrected, because she chose to, and now she is choosing to leave. He turned to me. Evelyn, are you ready? I looked at Damien one last time. 5 years. 5 years of cooking meals and doing laundry and sitting in the corner of his office, believing that I was part of something real. 5 years of listening to him talk about his vision and his mission and how he was going to change the world, and watching him change instead into someone who wore expensive suits and brought other women into our home and threw papers in my face. I thought about the girl I had been when I met him. 24 years old, determined to know what it felt like to be ordinary, determined to find someone who could love me without knowing what I came from. I had found him, and he had loved me, I think, for about 18 months. And then the money started coming in. My money, filtered through so many layers of legal structure that he never once questioned where it came from. And he had started to become someone else. Someone who cared about valuations and acquisitions and the specific model of watch that signaled you had arrived. I had watched it happen. I had told myself it was temporary, that success was disorienting, and that he would find his footing and remember who he actually was. But standing in that kitchen, with the divorce papers signed, and my brother waiting, and Damien staring at me as if I were a stranger, I understood that he had found his footing. This was who he was. The suits, the watch, the woman in the Celine trousers. This was what he wanted, and I was not part of it. "I am ready," I said to Lucian. "Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. Not for sympathy. I do not need sympathy, but because you need to understand what I gave up to live in that apartment, and what I learned, and why the moment Damien threw those papers in my face was the moment I stopped pretending. My name is Evelyn Marguerite Isolde of House Graymont. I am the second child and only daughter of His Serene Highness, Grand Duke Alexandre IV of Graymont, a sovereign microstate located between Switzerland and Liechtenstein, with a population of 41,000 people and a sovereign wealth fund valued at approximately 93 billion euros. Graymont is not large. It is not famous. Most people cannot locate it on a map, but it has been independent for 700 years, and it has been wealthy for 6 of those 700. And the wealth is managed with the kind of cold, multi-generational discipline that turns initial advantages into permanent, structural power. I was raised in the Graymont Palace, a 17th century structure with formal gardens and a private art collection that includes 2 Caravaggios and a Vermeer. I was educated by tutors until I was 16, then sent to boarding school in Switzerland, then to university in England, where I studied literature and archive science because I genuinely loved both and because no one in my family objected to me studying something impractical. I was not unhappy. My father was a distant but fundamentally decent man who took his responsibilities seriously. My mother had died when I was 11, an aneurysm, sudden and absolute. And after that it was my father, my brother Lucian, and a household staff of approximately 30 people who raised me with the particular combination of formality and affection that royal households specialize. But I was never ordinary. I was never By the time I was 24, I had been photographed at state functions in 6 countries, and there were online articles analyzing my clothing and speculating about my romantic prospects. And I had been introduced to 4 separate men, all of them titled, all of them from families my father considered appropriate as potential marriage candidates. I did not want to marry any of them, not because they were unsuitable, but because I did not know if they wanted me or the alliance. I did not know if anyone would ever want me, Evelyn, the person who liked old books and bad television and walks in the rain, or if they would only ever want Princess Evelyn, the asset, the connection, the second in line to a 93 billion euro fortune. So I made a plan. I told my father I needed time. I told Lucian I was going to disappear for a while. And with the help of a single trusted advisor in the Graymont legal office, I constructed a new identity. Evelyn March. British citizen, modest inheritance, working in archive conservation at a small independent bookshop in London. The bookshop was real. The job was real. The flat I rented in Archway was small and real, and mine in a way that palace suites never are. I told myself I would live this way for 2 years. I would meet someone who knew nothing about Graymont, and I would find out if love without context was possible. I met Damien Hale 9 months in. He walked into the bookshop on a Thursday afternoon in October, looking for a first edition of something by Evelyn Waugh. We did not have it. I offered to source it for him. He said that would be great. And then he asked if I wanted to get coffee, while I explained how book sourcing worked, because he was genuinely curious. And also, he said with a smile that was both confident and slightly self-deprecating, because I seemed like someone worth talking to. I said yes. Damien was 29. He was a software engineer working on a startup, something to do with logistics optimization for supply chains, which he explained to me over coffee with the kind of enthusiasm that people have when they are talking about something they genuinely believe in. He was smart. He was articulate. He had gone to a good university on a scholarship and had worked his way up through 2 failed startups before landing on the idea that he thought might actually work. He was also, at that point in his life, nearly broke. He was living in a flat share in Hackney with 2 other engineers. He was paying himself a minimal salary and reinvesting everything else into the company. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation. His shoes had a hole in the sole that he had patched with duct tape. I found all of this appealing, not because poverty is romantic, it is not, but because it meant he was not performing wealth. He was simply a man working towards something, and the work mattered more than the appearance. We started dating. The dating was modest and real. Walks along the canal, cheap dinners at Vietnamese restaurants in Shoreditch, a weekend trip to Brighton where we stayed in a bed and breakfast that cost £40 a night and had wallpaper from 1987. He talked about his company. I talked about books. He asked about my family. I told him my parents were dead, which was half true, and that I had a small inheritance that covered my expenses, which was technically true if you defined small in relative terms. He did not press. He seemed to accept the idea of me as someone self-contained and without complications. I think he liked that. I think it made me easier to fit into the life he was building. He proposed 14 months after we met. We were in his flat-share kitchen at 2 in the morning after he had spent 11 hours debugging code, and he looked up from his laptop and said, "I do not have a ring yet. I do not have anything yet, but I know I want to build a life with you, if you are willing to wait while I figure out how to afford one." I said I did not need a ring. I said yes. We were married 3 months later at a registry office in Islington with 6 people in attendance. His 2 flatmates, my colleague from the bookshop, and 2 friends I had made in London who knew me as Evelyn March and had no idea that the modest inheritance I occasionally referenced was a trust fund managed by a sovereign state. Damien's parents did not come to the wedding. They lived in Manchester. His father was a mechanic. His mother worked in retail. They had not approved of Damien dropping out of a stable engineering job to start a company, and they had been even less enthusiastic about him marrying a girl they had never met, who worked in a bookshop and had no visible prospects. They sent a card. It was polite and cold. I did not care. I thought we were building something real. For the first 2 years, we were. Damien worked constantly, and I supported him in every way I could. I cooked meals. I managed the flat. I sat quietly in the corner of his office and read while he worked, because he said my presence helped him think. When he needed capital to keep the company running, I arranged for it. This is the part that matters. This is the part Damien never understood. 6 months into the marriage, Damien's startup was running out of money. He had burned through his initial angel funding. He needed at least £200,000 to keep going, and he could not find anyone willing to invest. He came home one night and sat at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands and said, "I think I am going to have to shut it down." I said, "What if you could find an investor?" He said, "I have talked to everyone. No one is interested." I said, "Let me make a call." I called Lucian. I explained the situation. I told him I needed a shell investment vehicle, something that could not be traced back to Greymont, and I needed it to inject capital into Damien's company under terms that would give me control if I ever needed it, but would appear on paper to be a standard institutional investment. Lucian said, "Are you sure about this?" I said I was. 3 weeks later, Peninsula Capital contacted Damien with an offer, £200,000 in exchange for a 15% equity stake and a seat on the board that would remain unfilled unless the company failed to meet certain performance benchmarks. The terms were generous. Damien was ecstatic. He asked who Peninsula Capital was. The representative he spoke to said they were a private fund based in Liechtenstein that preferred to remain anonymous. Damien signed the deal. Over the next 4 years, Peninsula Capital invested an additional £6.3 million in staged funding rounds. Damien's company grew. He hired engineers. He signed contracts with major logistics firms. The valuation climbed. And Damien, who had started as a man in duct-taped shoes coding in a flat-share kitchen, became someone else. The someone else emerged gradually. First it was a new laptop, then a better phone. Then we moved out of the flat share into the two-bedroom flat in Clerkenwell, which was modest by any objective standard, but felt like a palace compared to where we had been. Damien started going to networking events. He started wearing better clothes. He started talking differently, not to me, but to other people. The way he spoke to investors, to potential hires, to journalists who started writing about him as one of London's rising tech founders. I watched it happen. I told myself it was fine. Success changes people. Ambition is not a flaw. But then he started talking about me differently, not to my face, in public. At events I did not attend, he would introduce himself and mention, casually, that his wife was very supportive, very low maintenance, not involved in the business. He said it like it was a compliment, like my lack of presence was a feature rather than a consequence of the fact that he had stopped inviting me. I started to notice other things. The way he would check his phone constantly during dinner, the way he stopped asking about my day, the way he started coming home later, smelling like expensive wine and someone else's perfume. I did not confront him. I told myself I was being paranoid. And then, 6 months ago, I met Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was introduced to Damien by one of his investors. She was 34, a venture capital associate at a firm that had considered investing in Damien's Series B round. She was beautiful in the specific way that requires both genetics and significant maintenance. Sharp cheekbones, blonde hair that looked effortless and cost a fortune, clothes that were always perfectly cut. She came to one of Damien's company events, and I watched her talk to him for 45 minutes in the corner of the room, and I watched him laugh at something she said, and I knew the way you know things that you do not want to know, but cannot unknow. He started staying out later. He started taking calls in the other room. And then, 3 months ago, he stopped pretending. He told me he needed space. He said the company was consuming all his energy and that he did not have the capacity for a relationship that required emotional labor. I said, I have not asked you for anything in 5 years. He said, exactly. You have never asked for anything. You have never wanted anything. You are just here, and I do not know what to do with that. I stared at him. You want me to want something? I want you to be someone, he said. Someone with ambition. Someone who is building something. Not just someone who works in a bookshop and cooks dinner. I could have told him then. I could have explained that I was someone. That I had built his entire company with money that came from a sovereign state I would one day help govern. That every dollar he thought he had earned had come from me. But I did not. Because I wanted to see how far he would go. The answer was, all the way. 2 weeks after that conversation, he brought Vanessa home. Not to introduce her, to humiliate me. He walked in at 8 in the evening with Vanessa beside him, and he looked at me standing in the kitchen where I had just finished cooking dinner for one, and he said, Vanessa and I are going out. We will be back late. Do not wait up. They left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, and then I called Lucien. I said, I am ready to come home. He said, what do you need? I said, I need the contracts amended. I need full reversion clauses, and I need it done in a way that he will not notice until it is too late. Lucien said, consider it done. The documents were filed with Companies House 6 weeks later. Buried in a routine amendment to the shareholder agreement, there was a clause stipulating that, in the event of divorce, all equity held by Peninsula Capital would revert to the beneficial owner. The beneficial owner was listed as E.M. Graymont. Damien's lawyers, if he had asked them to review the amendment, would have missed it. It was written in the kind of legal language that looks like boilerplate and is actually a trapdoor. Damien did not ask his lawyers to review it. He signed it without reading. And then, this morning, he came home with Vanessa and the divorce papers, and he threw them in my face. And he told me I was entitled to nothing. He was right. I was entitled to nothing. I was entitled to everything. Now standing in the kitchen of the flat with my brother and 4 officers of the protective service, and Damien staring at the contract as if it had just bitten him, I watched the understanding spread across his face like a stain. "You own my company," he said. His voice was hollow. "I funded your company," I corrected. "Peninsula Capital was mine. Every investment round, every capital injection, every term sheet, it all came from Greymont sovereign funds acting through holding structures I controlled. You signed the reversion clause 6 weeks ago, and you just finalized it by making me sign a divorce agreement that triggered the reversion terms." Vanessa stepped forward. Her face was white. "That is fraud. You deceived him." "I provided capital under terms he agreed to," I said. "There is no deception. There is simply information he did not ask for." Lucian looked at Damien with an expression of clinical detachment. "Mr. Hale, as of 9:47 this morning, when my sister signed the divorce papers you provided, you ceased to be the majority shareholder of your company. You are now a minority stakeholder with no operational control and no board representation. Peninsula Capital, which is to say my sister, owns 68%. The company is hers." Damien's hands were shaking. "You cannot do this." "It is already done," Lucian said. He gestured to Anton, who produced a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Damien. "These are the formal documents transferring operational control. You will receive a severance package equivalent to 6 months' salary. Your equity stake will be bought out at the valuation established in the most recent funding round. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement prohibiting you from discussing the ownership structure of the company, and you will vacate any operational role within 72 hours. Damien opened the folder. He read for maybe 10 seconds. Then he looked at me. "Evelyn, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake. I should not have." Vanessa does not mean anything. It was the stress. The company. I was not thinking clearly. I looked at him. 5 years. 5 years of believing he was someone worth hiding myself for. 5 years of watching him build an empire on my money and take credit for my faith in him. 5 years of being invisible while he became visible. "You were thinking clearly," I said. "You wanted someone with ambition, someone who was building something. You have that person. She is standing behind you. I hope she makes you very happy." I turned to Lucian. "I am ready to leave." We walked out of the apartment. Anton and the protective service officers formed a perimeter around me as we moved through the hallway and down the stairs. I could hear Damien behind me, saying my name, his voice climbing into something close to panic, but I did not turn around. Outside, the 12 SUVs were still arranged in formation. Lucian opened the door of the Maybach. I slid into the back seat. The interior was cream leather, silent, climate-controlled, the opposite of the flat I had just left. Lucian sat beside me. The door closed. The convoy began to move. "Are you all right?" Lucian asked. I looked out the window at the streets of Clerkenwell passing by, the buildings I had walked past for 5 years, the coffee shop where Damien and I used to meet on Sunday mornings, the park where I had sat alone on a bench reading books while he worked. "I am fine," I said. "What do you want to do with the company?" Lucian asked. I thought about it. Damien's company, the logistics platform he had built with my money, the team he had hired, the clients he had signed. It was worth £400 million, according to the most recent valuation. It was profitable. It was growing. "Sell it," I said, "to the highest bidder, and donate the proceeds to a fund for women leaving abusive marriages." Lucian smiled slightly. "That is pointed. That is accurate," I said. The sale was completed in 41 days. A consortium of investors led by a private equity firm acquired the company for £473 million. Damien's minority stake was bought out for £12 million. Vanessa, I later heard, left him 3 weeks after the acquisition closed. She had been interested in the founder of a £400 million company. She was not interested in a man with £12 million and no prospects. Damien sent me 62 messages in the 2 months after I left. I read the first one. It was 7 paragraphs long, single-spaced, explaining that he had made a terrible mistake and that he understood now what he had lost, and that if I would just give him a chance to explain, he could make things right. I did not read the other 61. I blocked his number after the 60-second message. I am back in Greymont now. I have resumed my actual life. The state functions, the diplomatic work, the quiet, serious business of helping govern a small sovereign state that takes its responsibilities more seriously than most countries 10 times its size. I am not hiding anymore. I am not pretending to be someone smaller or simpler or less than I am. And I have learned something that I did not know before I left. I learned that love without context is not actually possible. People do not love you in a vacuum. They love the version of you that fits into the story they are telling about their own life. Damien loved the version of me that was quiet and undemanding and did not require him to share the spotlight. He loved the idea of a woman who asked for nothing because it meant he could take everything. When I stopped being that version, when I became instead the person who owned the thing he thought was his, he could not love that. He could not even recognize it. I do not blame him for that. I blame him for the cruelty, for the papers thrown in my face, for bringing another woman into our home, for 5 years of taking my faith and my money and my quiet, invisible labor and treating it like it was worthless because it was not loud. Real power does not need to announce itself. It does not need to perform or justify or defend. It simply is. And when it acts with the full weight of structure and law and resources that have been accumulating for generations. Damien thought he had built an empire. He had built a house on land he did not own. And the moment he tried to claim ownership, the ground opened up and swallowed him whole. I walked away from that apartment with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. And I walked away owning everything that mattered. That is the difference between people who have power and people who perform it. Performance is loud, power is silent, and silence, when it finally speaks, is absolute. So tell me, what did you think of that moment when Damien realized he had just signed away his entire company to the wife he threw divorce papers at? Did you feel the satisfaction of watching a man who mistook kindness for weakness discover that the woman he dismissed was the reason he had anything to lose in the first place? If this story of patience, precision, and the kind of revenge that does not need to raise its voice made your day even slightly better, smash that like button, share this with everyone who has ever been underestimated, and subscribe so you never miss a story of power, karma, and the devastating elegance of consequences that were always coming.